That's a resolution authorizing the Service Safety Director to advertise for bids for the Lawrence Street Water Pollution Control Facility, the upgrade project that we've discussed a few times. This is coming through Public Works. Mr. James?
This will go for 3 readings, and this is something we've been anticipating. We're ready now to start getting some bids and get this thing on the road.
All right, I'm sorry, Mr. James.
That's okay.
Say that again, please.
We've discussed this situation with the Lawrence Street facility. Now it's time to go out for bids and see what we get.
Okay, so are there any questions on this? Okay. Any questions for Mr. James? And I don't think we need any more discussion. I think we had some pretty robust discussion on this. This is scheduled to go 3 readings in the absent or the consideration of a 4-week gap in our next meeting. Is 3 prudent for this? I'm looking for where the Service Safety Director is. Where's he? He's off.
He's on vacation.
I don't have the superintendent out there.
I think they want to go out for bids by August 28th. That should give us enough time, I think, to get through them.
Okay. All right, well, then we will stick with 3 readings as identified. He will be the sponsor, and Mr. Hall is your second.
That's correct.
All right, very good. Thank you. Next item is temporary resolution 8620. That is a resolution authorizing the Service Safety Director to advertise for bids and enter into a construction agreement for the improvement project known as Fair Avenue Memorial Drive to High Street, coming through Public Works. Mr. Scuno.
Yeah, I'm gonna have Kurt come up and talk a little bit about this, why we're looking at it tonight, and why we're gonna be asking for suspension.
Good evening. This section of Fair Avenue was always scheduled to be constructed in 2021. It's 95% funded with STP federal dollars. We bid out our Fair Avenue that's getting ready to start next week from High Street to Sheridan, and we got really good bids. The market's excellent for bidding roadway projects right now. We don't know how long that'll last. What we're trying to do is hurry up and get this one out to bid and take advantage of the market while it's still hot. There's no guarantee that we'll get the bids that we got before, but we thought it was worth an effort. The reason we're asking suspension is because we weren't really planning on bidding it out until maybe fall or winter, because that's our normal routine for next summer construction. But with those low bids, the other thing that did was free up enough money, STP money, that we could go ahead and bid that out this year as well, instead of waiting till the next quarter.
Okay, so a couple things. So we're bidding it out this year for next year still, correct? Or are we going to do it this year?
I don't think we'll be able to actually construct it this year, because assuming we have a fair, we've got some utilities that have to move. We've still got closing out on Broad Street, and we still have some more plan review items that have to be finished with ODOT. They're going to review things, and there's a process that they're doing their best to accelerate that process as well, but I doubt it's going to be constructed this year. And if we did bid it out, I wouldn't want to put a deadline too tight, or the bids would go right back up again. So I'd probably want to go ahead and give them plenty of time to build it.
That's fine. Let's stop telling them we're going out to bid right now for the great bids we're getting, and I think we're tipping our hand a little bit. But no, I think it's a great idea to do that. Are there questions for Kurt? Any issue with suspension? I kind of doubt. Is Very good. This will be Corey and
Mr. James?
Mr. James.
Yep.
All right, very good. Thank you, sir. We will suspend on 8620. Next item I have is 8720, and that's a resolution to create the expense and revenue accounts for the local coronavirus relief fund, CARES Act, and create those for the county, or for the, I'm sorry, for the city auditor. Auditor Nettles, you want to just tell us what else you can add to that?
Yeah, this is the funding that we just received, the federal coronavirus funding that we just actually received the ACHs from the county auditor last week. So we did get an additional 12,000 from making our total of, as you can see there, a little over $1 million to be able to be eligible to be reimbursed for COVID-19 expenses. So this is just my best guess on what the city departments will spend from March 1st through December. So I was trying to break it up the best I could, and I'll be coming back with council towards the end of the year to kind of do a cleanup piece, because all 100% of the unused or unspent cash has to go back to the county treasurer before the end of December. So this is just your basic budget to try to start reimbursing the departments, and we do have the cash in hand now.
Okay, any questions for Auditor Nettles? Yes, Mayor Scheffler.
No question, but I'd like to make it clear that we are probably only going to be eligible to spend a small fraction of this $1 million, because it's only to be reimbursed for COVID-related expenses that are incurred by the city that were not accounted for in the 2020 budget. So this is our allocation. We're still hoping that Congress will change what we can spend it for to include revenue replacement for lost revenue, but so far they haven't done that. They're negotiating on a new package right now. But if we don't spend it, we have to give it back.
Yeah, and I'll ask for a little color on that. I saw your note from last weekend, so at the end of finance, I'll ask you for an update on what you and the OML and the Mayor's Alliance are in the process of doing. So any questions for the auditor on this? In lieu of 2 readings, I'm going to ask for suspension just to
That's
clean
fine.
it up, since we have a 4-week break. You're just creating expense and revenue accounts so you can actually disperse the money.
Right, so we can start looking at and getting those expenses back for the COVID so
Right,
far.
I get it. Okay, thank you. Very good, thank you. Looks like I'm the sponsor, and Mel, you're going to be the second on this.
Okay.
Okay, so suspension on 8720. Do we have any departmental updates this evening? Gone. Moving on. President Gould for tonight's meeting prep.
So a couple of things very quickly. We're prepared to pass the one piece of legislation for the income tax. We'll place the other one on the table. You're all set for that, wherever that's coming through.
Finance, I'm good.
I'm guessing too. So do we need to clean up any of the Holly stuff?
I'll just read it as I'll change it.
You'll change it?
Yeah.
Okay. And then we're currently investigating the need to keep masks on for those of us who are participating here. The law director is actively looking. I contend we're in the middle of a broadcast communication, which is exempt and would allow us to drop our masks down. Randall has not signed off yet. He's reading, so we're putting him on the spot tonight, but we'll let him go. Other than that, I would suggest that anything that's left we try to pass this evening if it's not already scheduled to be passed, just so we can clear the agenda for the next 4 weeks before our next meeting. Other than that, I have nothing else, Mr. Stokes.
Thank you. Clerk Sandy.
If anyone would like to approach me before, that you're sponsoring on legislation or second, before the end of the meeting and want to sign it beforehand so we don't have the big cluster at the end, we can do that because it doesn't become effective until the mayor signs it. So I'll leave that up to each and every one of you.
Very good, thank you. Yes, Mr. McDaniel.
Yes, Mr. Stoughton, I'd like for you to second the 2 pieces that Holly was going to second tonight, economic development
You got it.
items.
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay, anything else? So we're going to go to other items for finance, and I'm going to ask for an update from Mayor Scheffler. He sent a note regarding the Ohio Municipal League, the Ohio Mayor's Alliance, communicating to Congress regarding the less restrictive uses of the CARES Act, plus funding the HEROES Act. So, Mayor Scheffler, if you want to add some color to it, we'd appreciate it.
Certainly. So the House came back into session at the end of June, and my understanding is the House and the Senate are hot in negotiating another relief package for various people, various entities, levels of government, schools, et cetera. All of the industry associations on both the state and the national level are engaged in a full court press to get Congress to include in that some relief for lost revenue for local governments and states. So I sent, I think, to all the city council members the letter that went from the Ohio Mayor's Alliance, the Ohio Municipal League, the Township Trustees Association, and the County Commissioners Association to our senators and congressmen, outlining some facts about what the losses are and encouraging them to include revenue relief for states and local governments.
Is there anything from a form letter perspective you'd like us to push towards our congressional delegation again, if you feel that would help?
The more communications they receive encouraging them to act, the better. So if all of you could send them, and I can recirculate their fax numbers and their email addresses, which is the quickest and easiest way to get them something, I'd be happy to do that tomorrow.
Yeah, please do, and I really encourage everyone around this table to reach out and do that. I mean, if that doesn't happen and the CARES Act money is not modified on how it can be spent, we're going to have a big problem, and it's going to come quick. So that's
Right.
not an unfair statement, correct?
That is.
Okay. All right. Any questions for the mayor on that? All right, very good. Thank you, Mayor Scheffler. I appreciate the update on that. Any other items for finance? Seeing none, Mrs. Bobbitt, will you give me a motion to adjourn?
I make a motion that we adjourn.
And I will second, and we are adjourned. Let the record reflect. Got 18 minutes.
Record time there, Mr. Stowe. The regular meeting of Lancaster City Council will begin at 6:30. Again, if anyone wants to sign their legislation early, please feel free to come up, maybe not all at once, so we can still avoid the cluster, but you can see the clerk and sign them, and then we'll be in session at 6:30.
There is no place like Lancaster, Ohio, and Fairfield County, and like you, I am proud to call them home. As a longtime resident of Lancaster and graduate of Lancaster High School, this community is important to me, and I want to provide superior customer service, professionalism, integrity, and honesty at the Connor Insurance Agency. I am committed to supporting local programs and projects through my volunteer work and board membership with several organizations. It has been a great honor to work with all the first responders throughout Lancaster, Fairfield County, and the state of Ohio to put on Kids and Cops Day, to be a part of Shop with a Cop alongside the Lancaster Police Department and JFS, and to help Lancaster Public Education Foundation raise funds to support our local public schools and teachers. These men and women work hard to protect and support our community, and I would like to take this moment to say thank you for all they do. My goal as a business owner and insurance agent is to provide my clients with the most appropriate services and coverage for their needs at a competitive rate. As an independent agent, I have several carriers to choose from so I can customize your insurance coverage to fit your needs and desires. I strive to make sure there are no gaps in your coverage that could be harmful, and just as important, that you are not overinsured. I look forward to serving your insurance needs now and in the future. At Connor Insurance, we are here to serve you by protecting what is important to you. Please contact my office at 740-654-2848 for a full list of services and carriers, or visit my website, ConnorInsuranceAgency.com.
Almost everyone needs a car to get from point A to point B, and many families have 2 or more cars. At Carriage Company, located at 1031 North Memorial Drive in Lancaster, we specialize in hard-to-find used cars. We can help you find exactly what you're looking for.
Come into the Carriage Company and check out our sweet deals.
Stop by today and let us help you, or visit us online at carriagecompany.com.
The Frankie Smith Funeral Home and Crematory in Lancaster and the Johnson Smith Funeral Home in Baltimore have a long and wonderful history of serving our community. Feel free to give us a call at 740-653-0652. Stop in and see us at either of our two locations, 405 North Columbus Street in Lancaster and 207 South Main Street in Baltimore. Respect for tradition, regard for change.
Good evening. Welcome to this meeting of Lancaster City Council. Please join me in a word of prayer. Father, we thank you for this day and your blessings. We thank you for your continued leadership, guidance, and direction for each one of us, for the city of Lancaster. We ask that you would continue to be with us, help us in the work that's set before us. May we continue to be safe, Lord. Help us to do the things we need to do to maintain our health and to help others do the same. We ask for your blessings upon each and every person, each and every law enforcement officer, our first responders, each person that is serving this great country, Lord. We ask for your guidance and direction and your protection upon them. Continue to be with us tonight, we pray. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
I hereby call this meeting of Lancaster City Council to order. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. As we begin tonight, let me just note that as we have reviewed the current health order that is in effect from the Ohio Department of Health, we note that there is an exemption for those who are involved in broadcast communication. This is a broadcast communication, and so for those members of council and administration that are around the table, should you choose to lower your masks, whether you're speaking or at any time during the meeting, you are permitted to do so. For those who are seated in the gallery in the public, if you wanted to come forward and were speaking at the microphone, you at that time could lower your mask as well. So just to be clear, we're not attempting to thwart the order, or we're not simply just standing, in opposition to it. We're exercising one of the exemptions that is available within the current health order. I see Randall gesticulating wildly. I'm sorry, Law Director, what?
I said, and maintaining your social distance.
And yes, thank you. We are all socially distanced. We have spread out across this room. There are maybe 6 or so in the gallery, maybe 8, and then each member of council and administration has at least 6 feet between them. So thank you for pointing that out, Law Director Allen. With that, please call the roll.
Mrs. Bobbitt.
Here.
Mrs. Downhour. Mr. Hall.
Here.
Mr. James.
Here.
Mr. Matlin.
Here.
Mr. McDaniel.
Here.
Mr. Schoonover.
Here.
Mr. Stoughton.
Here.
And Mrs. Teener.
Here.
Let the record reflect that 8 of 9 members of City Council are in attendance this evening. Mr. Stoughton.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to make a motion that we excuse Mrs. Downhour from tonight's meeting.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to excuse Ms. Downhour from tonight's meeting. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Ms. Downhour is excused. Reading and disposing of the journal.
I'd like to present the regular meeting minutes dated June 22nd, 2020.
Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion to receive and file the journal.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to receive and file the journal. Any discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Reports of city officials.
Series of emails regarding Board of Election cost question and answer submitted by Auditor Tricia Nettles. Email dated July 13, 2020 regarding tonight's meeting submitted by President Wool. And finally, an email dated July 13, 2020 regarding agenda for tonight's Finance Committee meeting submitted by Mrs. Downhour.
Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion to receive and file the reports of city officials.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to receive and file reports of city officials. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Are there any communications?
There are 2. Email dated July 9th, 2020 regarding the 2019 financial disclosure statement deadline filing reminder submitted by Jen Boger, the financial disclosure coordinator for the Ohio Ethics Commission. And finally, an email dated July 13th, 2020 regarding tonight's meeting, submitted by Bob Campetti, Interface Video.
Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion to receive and file the communications.
Second?
We have a motion and a second to receive and file communications. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Motion carries. We have no special presentations or awards tonight. Are there any petitions or memorials?
There are none to be presented.
During this time at each city council meeting, we set time aside to hear from the voters and taxpayers of the city of Lancaster. If you'd like to address Lancaster City Council this evening, we ask that you come forward, state your name and address for the record. And as I'm looking out, I just don't see any public, so I'm wondering if I need to go through this spiel, except for Miss Rebecca. Would you like to address City Council this evening? That was an emphatic no, and so we will forego that, noting that there's no members of the public here, only members of the administration and the press. Outside of anyone, he's waving off as he is not interested either, so we will move ahead. Are there reports of standing committees?
There are two. The Finance Committee meeting minutes for June 22nd, 2020, submitted by Mrs. Downhour, and the Finance Committee meeting minutes for July 13th, 2020, submitted by Mr. Stoughton.
Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion to receive and file the reports of standing committees.
Second?
We have a motion and a second to receive and file reports of standing committees. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Are there reports of special committees?
There are none to be
We
presented.
have no public hearings tonight, so we'll move to the reading of resolutions, beginning with the third reading of temporary resolution 71-20.
A resolution to appropriate from the unencumbered balance and to amend the certificate of appropriations with the county auditor in the General Fund 101, offered by Mrs. Bobbitt, second by Mr. Stoughton.
Ms. Bobbitt.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to make a motion the council pass, engross, and enter upon the written record temporary resolution number 7120.
Second?
We have a motion and a second to pass, engross, and enter upon the written record temporary resolution 71-20. Discussion, Ms. Bobbitt.
Just as it reads, this is for unemployment payments.
Thank you very much. Further discussion on the motion to pass. Please call the roll.
Mrs. Bobbitt?
Yes.
Mr. Hall?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
Mr. Stoughton?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener.
Yes.
Temporary resolution 71-20 passes 8-0. Temporary resolution 73-20. Right?
Yeah, I just don't have it on
Oh, well, there it is.
A resolution approving and authorizing the mayor to submit to the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, Lancaster's fiscal year FY 2020 Community Development Block Grant Annual Action Plan and Statement of Objectives and amendments, offered by Mr. McDaniel, second by Mr. Stoughton.
Mr. McDaniel.
Yes, Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion that council pass, engross, and enter upon the written record resolution temporarily numbered 73-20.
Mr. Stoughton, can we get a second on that one?
Second.
We have a motion and a second to pass, engross, and enter upon the written record temporary resolution 73-20. Discussion, Mr. McDaniel.
This is our community development block grant. We've had discussion here at council and at economic development meeting and a presentation by our economic development director. I appreciate all the work that her office has put into this, and I think we're ready for a vote.
Very good, thank you. Further discussion on the motion to pass. Yes, Ms. Teener.
I do want to say, I've worked with Linda on this, and she and I had like a 2-hour meeting, and she's really doing a really good job. I mean, she's asking questions and pushing things forward, and she's really an advocate for the business owners here, and not only that, homeowners that need help. So, I mean, she's really doing a great job, so thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Teener. Further discussion on the motion to pass. Please call the roll.
Mrs. Bobbitt?
Yes.
Mr. Hall?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
Mr. Stoughton?
Abstain.
Mrs. Teener?
Abstain.
Temporary resolution 73-20 passes 6-0 with 2 abstentions. Temporary resolution 75-20.
A resolution authorizing the adoption of a revised investment policy of public funds for the city of Lancaster, Ohio, offered by Mrs. Bobbitt, second by Mr. Stoughton.
Ms. Bobbitt.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to make a motion that council pass, engross, and enter upon the written record temporary resolution number 7520.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to pass, engross, and enter upon the written record temporary resolution 75-20. Discussion, Ms. Bobbitt?
As it reads, this is to adopt and revise our new investment policy in public funds.
Very good. We heard about this at length at a prior
Yes.
meeting. Does anyone have other discussion on the motion to pass? Yes, Mr. Stoughton?
It hasn't been updated since 1996.
I think that's right. Yeah.
About time.
Further discussion? Please call the roll.
Mrs. Bobbitt,
Yes.
Mr. Hall,
Yes.
Mr. James,
Yes.
Mr. Matlin,
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel,
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover,
Yes.
Mr. Stoughton,
Yes.
and Mrs. Teener.
Yes.
Temporary resolution 75-20 passes 8-0. We now have second reading on a series of resolutions, beginning with temporary resolution 82-20.
A resolution authorizing the mayor to negotiate and enter into a cooperative service agreement with the Lancaster Port Authority. Offered by Mr. McDaniel, second by Mr. Stoughton.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes, Mr. President. I would like to make a motion the council suspend its rules and waive the the third reading of resolution number 82-20.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to suspend the third reading and to suspend the rules and waive the third reading of temporary resolution 82-20. Discussion, Mr. McDaniel.
On the motion to pass.
On the motion to pass, very good. Discussion on the motion to suspend. Please call the roll.
Mrs. Bobbitt,
Yes.
Mr. Hall,
Yes.
Mr. James,
Yes.
Mr. Matlin,
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel,
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover,
Yes.
Mr. Stoughton,
Yes.
and Mrs. Teener.
Yes.
Motion to suspend passes 8-0. Mr. McDaniel.
Yes, Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion the council pass, engross, and enter upon the written record resolution temporarily numbered 82-20.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to pass, engross, and enter upon the written record temporary resolution 82-20. Discussion, Mr. McDaniel.
Yes, once again, we've had detailed discussions on this particular resolution, not only here, but at economic development meeting. This will allow the Port Authority to assume some additional duties that will be to the benefit of the city, bringing Economic Development Director under the Port Authority and working directly with the city and allowing us to, as you know, the CIC was abolished, or being abolished. I don't know if it's formally closed its operations, but will very soon, and this allows us to continue economic development operations under the Port Authority umbrella.
Thank you, Mr. McDaniel. Other discussion on the motion to pass? Please call the roll.
Mrs. Bobbitt,
Yes.
Mr. Hall,
Yes.
Mr. James,
Yes.
Mr. Matlin,
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel,
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover,
Yes.
Mr. Stoughton,
Yes.
and Mrs. Teener.
Yes.
Temporary resolution 82-20 passes 8-0. Temporary resolution 84-20.
A resolution declaring the necessity of an election on the question of approving the passage of an ordinance to amend section 183.012, 183.013, and 183.002 of the codified ordinances of the city of Lancaster, Ohio, in order to provide for the levy of a 45/100th of 1%, 0.45% tax effective January 1st, 2021, and continuing thereafter on the salaries, wages, commissions, and other compensations subject to the municipal income tax, with all such tax to be used for the purpose of operating, maintaining, repairing, and providing capital facilities for the fire and police department of the city, and to declare an emergency. Offered by Mr. Stoughton, second by Mrs. Bobbitt.
Mr. Stoughton.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to make a motion that council suspend its rules and waive the third reading of resolution temporary 84-20.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to suspend the rules and waive the third reading of temporary resolution 84-20. Discussion, Mr. Stoughton.
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. The suspension is because we need to get this to the Board of Elections. What, is it 90 days or 100 days? Or?
I think it's 90 before, right? Mr. Walter, yes.
So we don't have a meeting again until August, which would be late. So we're asking for suspension this evening.
Very good. Further discussion on the motion to suspend. Please call the roll.
Mrs. Bobbitt,
Yes.
Mr. Hall,
Yes.
Mr. James,
Yes.
Mr. Matlin,
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel,
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover,
Yes.
Mr. Stoughton,
Yes.
and Mrs. Teener.
Yes.
Motion to suspend passes 8-0. Mr. Stoughton.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to make a motion that council pass and vote and enter upon the written record resolution temporary 84-20.
Second?
We have a motion and a second to pass, engross, and enter upon the written record temporary resolution 84-20. Discussion, Mr. Stokes.
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. This, again, is the identical tax increase we asked for in the primary. The fact is, the city does need the money. The city, our city, has one of the lowest tax rates in the state of Ohio and one of the lowest tax rates of cities our size. I think if, and this is going to fund, 70% of this funding is for safety forces and other projects that the mayor has ad nauseum shared with us, and will do so again for the next 4 months. But again, there are no changes to it because the need is as much today as it was back in March.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Stokes. Further discussion on the motion to pass. Please call the roll.
Mrs. Bobbitt?
Yes.
Excuse me, Mr. Hall?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
Mr. Stoughton?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener.
Yes.
Temporary resolution 84-20 passes 8-0. We now have first reading on a series of resolutions, beginning with temporary resolution 85-20.
A resolution authorizing the Service Safety Director to advertise for bids for the Lawrence Street Water Pollution Control Facility, LSWPCF, upgrade project, offered by Mr. James, second by Mr. Hall.
Mr. James.
This is the first of 3 readings.
First reading on temporary resolution 85-20. Temporary resolution 86-20.
A resolution authorizing the Service Safety Director to advertise for bids and enter into a construction agreement for the improvement known as the FAI CR 54-4.31 PID 106859 Fair Avenue Memorial Drive to High Street, offered by Mr. Schoonover, second by Mr. James.
Mr. Schoonover.
Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion that council suspend its rules and waive the second and third reading of temporary resolution 86-20.
I will second that.
We have a motion and a second to suspend the rules and waive the second and third reading of temporary resolution 86-20. Discussion, Mr. Schoonover.
No, thank you.
Discussion on the motion to suspend. Please call the roll.
Mrs. Bobbitt?
Yes.
Mr. Hall?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
Mr. Stoughton?
Yes.
Mrs. Teener.
Yes.
Motion to suspend passes 8-0. Mr. Schoonover.
Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion that council pass, engross, and enter upon the written record temporary resolution 86-20.
Mr. James.
I'll second that.
We have a motion and a second to pass, engross, and enter upon the written record temporary resolution 86-20. Discussion, Mr. Schoonover.
Yeah, this piece gives us an opportunity to get ahead in the game for bidding out construction road projects for next year.
Very good. Further discussion on the motion to pass. Please call the roll.
Mrs. Bobbitt?
Yes.
Mr. Hall?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
Mr. Stoughton?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener.
Yes.
Temporary resolution 86-20 passes 8-0. Temporary resolution 87-20.
A resolution to increase receipts, appropriate from the unencumbered balance in the local coronavirus relief fund 2050, amend the certificate of other sources and appropriations with the county auditor, offered by Mr. Stoughton, second by Mrs. Bobbitt.
Mr. Stoughton.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to make a motion that council suspend its rules and waive the second and third reading of resolution temporary 87-20.
Second?
We have a motion and a second to suspend the rules and waive the second and third reading of temporary resolution 87-20. Discussion, Mr. Stoughton.
Thank you.
Discussion on the motion to suspend. Please call the roll.
Mrs. Bobbitt?
Yes.
Mr. Hall?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
Mr. Stoughton?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener.
Yes.
Motion to suspend carries 8-0. Mr. Stoughton.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to make a motion that council pass, engross, and enter upon the written record resolution temporary 87-20.
Second?
We have a motion and a second to pass, engross, and enter upon the written record temporary resolution 87-20. Discussion, Mr. Stoughton.
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. The auditor is certainly required to create revenue and expense accounts for monies received from the CARES Act, and that's a little over $1 million. I want to remind folks that listen to finance that Mayor Scheffler was very clear that we will only get to spend a fraction of that money because the CARES rules are very restrictive to use for reimbursement of COVID-19 expenses, and there are certain caveats on how you calculate and how you can use those expenses. So while we have $1 million in hand, we're probably going to give a big check back to the county, who will then return it to the state. But to track these revenues and expenses, the auditor needs obviously these accounts set up in their ledger. I've asked for suspension tonight because our next meeting is 4 weeks out. That's why. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Further discussion on the motion to pass? Please call the roll.
Mrs. Bobbit?
Yes.
Mr. Hall?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
Mr. Stoughton?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener?
Yes.
Temporary resolution 87-20 passes 8-0. Are there further resolutions to come before Lancaster City Council this evening? If not, we'll move to the reading of ordinances, beginning with the second reading of temporary ordinance 14-20.
An ordinance to amend section 183.012, 183.013, and 183.02 of the codified ordinances of the city of Lancaster in order to provide for the levy of an additional 0.45%, 0.45% income tax effective January 1st, 2021 on the salaries, wages, commissions, and other compensations subject to the municipal income tax, with all such tax to be used for the purpose of operating, maintaining, repairing, and providing capital facilities for the fire and police department of the city, and to declare an emergency, offered by Mrs. Downhour, second by Mr. Stoughton.
Mr. Stoughton. Thank you, Mr. President. We're going to have second reading on this tonight, and then when we're done with ordinances, I will ask to put it on the table.
Very good. Second reading then on temporary ordinance 14-20. I do believe that is the end of the business within the ordinances. Mr. Stoughton.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to make a motion that council place on the table ordinance temporary 1420.
Second.
We have a motion to place upon the table temporary ordinance 14-20. This motion is not debatable. Please call the roll.
Mrs. Bobbit?
Yes.
Mr. Hall?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
Mr. Stoughton?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener?
Yes.
Temporary ordinance 14-20 is placed upon the table. Are there further ordinances to come before Lancaster City Council this evening? Seeing none, is there action on tabled legislation this evening? Seeing none, we'll move into unfinished business, and I'll just ask Mr. Stoughton to briefly discuss why we placed that on the table, since we couldn't discuss the motion. You can address why.
Thank you, Mr. President. There's homework.
That's all right. You know the answer.
The ordinance will sit on the table until we know the results of the election in November. When that passes, then we will move to the table after passage.
I appreciate the optimism.
Thank you.
When that passes, that is indeed accurate. Thank you, sir. Is there further unfinished business this evening? If not, is there new business this evening?
Mr. President, just.
Mr. Hall.
I would like to spend a minute or two talking about the coronavirus and and the implications it has for Lancaster and Fairfield County, if I could. I'm going to pass around a handout. It's front and back. The front of the handout is a map of the state of Ohio. And the map depicts the rate per 100,000 infections by county. And then the backside, there are two sets of graphs just for central Ohio counties. The first set of graphs looks at infections and how infections have changed over time. And then the second set of graphs looks at hospitalizations and how they have changed over time. And as this is going around, just briefly, Lancaster and Fairfield County falls within the top tier in terms of infections per 100,000 population. Now, it's a broad band because we have two counties, both with prisons located within them, that had massive rates of infection in a very short period of time. That would be Marion and Pickaway counties. But other than Marion and Pickaway counties, you have Franklin County, which has the highest rate per 100,000 population in terms of infections for all large urban centers. So if you step back and think about the situation that Fairfield County is in, we are contiguous with Pickaway County, which has the second highest rate of infections in the state of Ohio, and we're contiguous with Franklin County, which has the highest rate of infections for any urban center in Ohio. And then finally, we have a prison within 10 miles of the city of Lancaster. So we have significant risk factors which put us in at a degree of elevated risk. If you look at the backside, again, this is just for central Ohio counties. The top set of graphs shows the degree to which infections have changed over time. And what you see there is that Fairfield County, like Franklin, Delaware, Licking, and Union counties in central Ohio has seen a significant uptick in infections over the past several weeks, which I think is or should be concerning to all of us. And then the second set of graphs is hospitalizations. And in that respect, we're holding our own. We have not seen increases, which is, I think, an encouraging sign. But generally speaking, I think that the data would suggest that we are at a vulnerable state, both statewide and here in Fairfield County. And I think that we, as elected officials, need to do our part to make sure that we establish standards and set some leadership expectations around wearing masks and having businesses and citizens conduct themselves in ways that we protect vulnerable citizens of our city and our county.
Thank you, Mr. Hall. Who has questions this evening for Mr. Hall? Well, Ms. Teener, I see that hand waving, and then we'll come to Mr. Stone.
So-
I have a couple questions as well.
Okay, so the people that are tested positive, so when they get retested again to see if they're positive, and then they test positive again, and then they get tested again, is that being just one time they're getting tested and they're positive, or each time? Because that will raise your numbers. If somebody's thinking, oh, okay, I'm gonna see if I'm over this, and they go get tested again, they're positive. So there you go, there's another statistic. So what's going on there?
You know, that's an interesting question. I don't have a ready answer.
Because
for
that could raise
your
your numbers right there.
What I would say is that it's my understanding that the state of Ohio counts their infections in pretty much the same way that every other state counts their infections. So whatever process that we use would be similar to how other states count their rate of infections. And I don't think that the process has changed over time. So regardless of the process that we use, what we see is a significant number of infections that have incurred in our state. It is an interesting question. We can look at that. I'd be happy to look into that and either send you an email or we'll report back at our next meeting.
Okay.
Very good. Further questions? Yes, I saw Mr. Stone. We'll go to the spot.
Mr. Hull, I appreciate you bringing this forward, but as you know, there's going to be many people around this table and many people in our communities that question the validity of the data. You know, Mrs. Teener just asked you a very specific question about data that you couldn't answer because you're not an expert. So my question to you is, you know, what is your point for, other than taking a leadership role and wearing masks, which we will do because it has been mandated by the state of Ohio. You don't know that these data points are valid.
I never claimed to be an expert in these data. I have been mining the data for the past several weeks. It's an interesting question. I don't think anybody could answer every aspect of that. And I'm happy to look into it and to report back what we find. I do think that if you look at the existing trends in the data as they're presented by the Department of Health, and if you look at the risk factors, the known risk factors around this particular issue, we should all be concerned about that. And that the consequences of us making mistakes around these data are dire.
I get it, but we also hear, if you can ask, you could walk outside and talk to 10 people, and you ask them how comfortable they are with the data that's being presented to them. No different than the data that you've given us, and the way the state is basically putting their yellow, orange, red, and purple graph. You know, don't you find it ironic there's no green in the reporting numbers from the state of Ohio?
I don't necessarily find that ironic.
Well, I do, because Mr. Hall, no different than you reporting on something you printed off of a website.
I didn't print that off of a website, Mr. Stoughton.
Well, where'd you print it off?
I downloaded the data and I generated those graphs on my own. I also want to say that, and again, I do not portray myself as an expert,
Well,
but
then you shouldn't sit here and pretend to do so. If you want.
I am not pretending to be an expert.
Sir,
No.
Mr. Hall, I'm okay with you telling us that we need to be leader-like. I got no problem with that. What I do have is you don't know the validity of what's sitting behind the data on the graphs, oh, by the way, you created. Because you just said you are not a data expert. You're not.
No, I didn't say I wasn't a data expert. I said I wasn't an expert on that particular issue, and I'm not an expert on coronavirus. But all of us have an interest in understanding what the data says, and if there are elements of this that we don't understand, then we can look into that and bring it back to the table.
Do you think there's anyone sitting around this table that hasn't been looking at coronavirus data since the middle of March?
I would hope not. I would hope that everyone would be looking at it, and I think that it's a valid exercise for all of us to look at the same data and to have a reasonable discussion about it, Mr. Stoughton.
So you do know that I can take your data sets and produce different graphs?
Then, you know what, I'm happy to provide you with my data sets so that you can provide us with a different side of that information.
I'm not going to do that because as a IT professional, I don't know the validity of the data sitting behind the graphs that you've created, and oh, by the way, you don't either. You are taking the state of Ohio at their word. And when I sit there and have to watch the governor basically get asked a very specific data-driven question specific to the results he's reporting, he would not answer the question. So my point here is I completely agree with you about the leadership role that we need to take as civil servants and as elected officials. I have a fundamental problem when you say, I got this data and I created these graphs, because in the same sentence, you also said you weren't an expert, okay? And so what you're doing is you are bringing up a very emotional problem that has affected a lot of families in a lot of different ways.
I don't know that anybody can claim complete expertise on an issue that is as complicated as the coronavirus, Mr. Stoughton.
So your point is to
But
give us
no,
data.
my point here is that those of us that have an interest in this particular issue, and most of us do, that we have an obligation to understand the data as well as we can and to make reasoned decisions about what we're going to do as a city to protect our citizens.
I think the mayor has done a fantastic job at leading the city with what we're going to do to combat coronavirus. He followed his cues well from, as required. I think he has been very proactive. When you sit there and you can't answer a simple question, hear me out, from Mrs. Teener about the validity of the data, I don't think it's genuine to give this to people to then go report this to our constituents, because you've now made this a public document.
I hear your concerns.
Thank you.
And I'm happy to look into that particular piece. I don't know that any one individual can answer on any given issue the validity or questions about a particular data set. And I'm sure the governor couldn't have, I suspect that the governor couldn't have answered that particular question. What I said, and I'm certainly committed to doing this, is to finding out what the answer is and reporting it back.
That'd be great. Mr. President, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Stoughton. Ms. Bobbitt?
I just wanted to make two comments. Because of the counties on here, the only thing I wanted to comment on was Pickaway and Marion. And as you probably already are aware, there are prisons in those two counties, and that's what elevated theirs early on.
Exactly. That is
Because I track the
exactly
numbers
true.
every day, too.
As all of us know, we have a prison within 10 miles
Right.
of the city of Lancaster, too.
Thank you.
Further discussion or questions on this particular topic? All right, let's move forward then, and ask if there's any other new business this evening that anyone would like to address. If there's no other new business, we'll ask that the clerk read our announcement of scheduled meetings.
Can I-
Yes.
I just want to let folks know there will be an IT meeting meeting on Friday. So that will not be canceled. I got feedback from Mark today, so I will be sending out an agenda hopefully tomorrow, maybe Wednesday. Thank you.
Okay, upcoming meetings, August 10th, the meeting following, August 24th, both meetings here, City Council chambers, unless something changes, at 6:30 PM. Upcoming committee meetings, Law Committee, July 15th, 9:30 at the City Hall, 1897 Conference Room. IT Telecom, July 17th, 7:30 AM at the City Hall, 1897 Conference Room. Code Enforcement and Zoning, August 3rd, 8 AM, City Hall, 1897 Conference Room. Service, August 7th at 7:30 AM, City Hall, 1897 Conference Room. Finance, August 10th, 6 PM here in Council Chambers. Water Pollution Control, August 12th at 8 AM at the Water Pollution Control Conference Room. I am looking to change that for Mr. James, if the 1897 Conference Room is available, and I will put a news flash online. And finally, Law Committee, August 12th, 9:30 AM at the Fairfield County Municipal Court Community Room.
Thank you, Clerk Sandy. Are there any bills?
There are. As you remember, last time I did not print the last page of my pre-minutes, so the total's gonna be a little high. So publication of legislation and for public hearings, we owe a total of $375.25. That will be payable to the PNC card for charges to MNCO. And finally, as you might remember, during one of our virtual meetings, I asked for permission to purchase some books to hold our legislation. That bill has come in. It'll be payable to PNC for pro forma, $517.03.
Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion to pay the bills.
We have a motion to pay the bills.
Second.
We have a second discussion.
Yeah, Clerk Sandy, do we have any budgetary issues in our line item? I mean, are you over budget on anything?
No, I was able to transfer some money. I'm good right now.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
I will keep you apprised if anything would come up.
Further discussion on the motion. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Is there a need for an executive session this evening? Seeing none, a motion to adjourn is in order.
Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion that we adjourn.
I second that motion.
We have a motion and a second to adjourn the meeting. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 All opposed, same sign. Motion carries. We are adjourned. Thank you all very much. There is quite a gap between now and our next meeting. We don't have any need for a special meeting. Barring any need, we'll look forward to seeing you in about 4 weeks. Have a great little break here. We are adjourned.